all over the board. While you talk about the officers out there?
No, we have a couple of inmate witnesses.
Oh, I don't think we're going to do those today. That's probably going to happen.
I'll ask him when he gets back.
A record about what we were discussing? All right, so we're back on the record. The appearances remain the same. The jury is out of the courtroom. Right before the break, there was a sidebar. Just the issue was what pictures to use with this witness regarding the autopsy of Heesun Teague. And there had been an agreement, and there was some question about whether further discussion on that issue needed to occur. And I now understand the parties talked about it and have come to an agreement as to what pictures would be shown, and with no objection from the defense. Is that correct?
Yes. That is correct, Your Honor. There are some pretty graphic photographs. We narrowed it down prior to today and took out photographs that were really graphic and bloody. But Dr. Tranchita, in our opinion, did a very good job of describing his injuries. We've agreed with the defense. We're going to show L1M4 and then 1M12 through 19. And if they agree as well, we will not be showing the other photographs that we had kind of in our slide presentation.
And at some point when you offer that exhibit, will you be able to delete the photos that you're not using?
I can do that, Judge.
Okay.
All right.
All right, are we prepared to bring, and that's the agreement, Mr. Cotton?
Yes.
All right, are you prepared to have the jury come back in?
Yes.
All right, please stand for the jury. Please be seated. The jury is returned to the courtroom. Do we have Dr. Tranchita?
Yes.
If you would please return to the witness stand and swap your mask for a shield, and then I remind you, you remain under oath. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Tranchita, I'd like to, before we complete the direct examination, ask you to show you several photographs and see if you could identify these for the jury. The first photograph I'd like to show you is 1M4. And could you, Dr. Tranchita, identify what is depicted in 1M4 up on the screen?
This was the ligature or rope that was recovered from around Heesun Teague's neck, of the body of Heesun Teague. It appears to be a yellow woven nylon sort of rope that was looped around, or looped through rather, a gray metal hook. This created a non-fixed simple noose around the decedent's neck.
Now, Dr. Tranchita, you've already discussed numerous injuries on Heesun Teague's body in various places that either had a complete circle shape or half circle or like a crescentic type of shape, like a crescent moon. I want to show you one specific photo. It would be 1M12. See if you could identify that, jury.
One M12 is depicting crescent-shaped abrasions on the upper aspect of the left side of the decedent's back, just on the medial aspect or the closest part to the midline of the shoulder blade. In addition, there's a second, more circular, outlined circular abrasion. These are what we referred to earlier as our patterned abrasions. In other words, these aren't just irregular sort of shapes on the skin surface. There's a very kind of clearly defined shape to this injury, which might be helpful to indicate what sort of instrument or object caused or surface caused these injuries.
Okay. Now, Dr. Tranchita, as part of your examination, part of your autopsy in this case, did you have an opportunity to look at a tire iron that was displayed to you as part of this autopsy?
I did, and I referred to this tire iron on page 14 of the autopsy report. This was after the completion of the autopsy. In a separate room, I examined a tire iron that was brought to me as a possible instrument.
I'd like to show you just several more photographs at this time, starting with 1M13. Can you identify that photograph for the jury?
This is the tire iron that was brought to me. This is a photograph that was taken by us. We have used a blue tray as a background, and this is our label from our medical examiner's office. It's a grayscale label, so that we can detect to see if there's any alteration to color, and it also has a scale on it as well. The case number for this case is also included on the label, so we know which photograph goes with which case. This is the tire iron that was given. As you can see, it has a rounded edge, it has a chiseled edge, and the remainder of the tire iron is wrapped in what appears to be gray duct tape.
And as you look at as you got to look at that tire iron depicted in this photograph, was there at least a red substance on portions of the duct tape as well?
That is correct. In particular, there was dried red residue on the socket end of the tire iron, as well as on the duct tape as well.
I'd like to go forward to 1M14. Can you just describe it? It's more of a close-up. Could you describe that for the jury?
This is some of that tacky red substance residue that was present, consistent with blood, on the duct tape of the tire iron.
And is this the end of it, or has the rounded area at the end of the tire iron?
That is correct.
Okay. Go to 1M15. More of a close-up again.
This is more towards the middle portion between the socket end and the chisel end of the tire iron. Again, the duct tape that's wrapped around the handle, if you will. And again, red residue droplets present on the duct tape.
Go forward to photograph 1M16.
This is another close-up to, again, emphasize the presence of this red residue of droplets present on the duct tape.
1M17.
This is the chisel portion of the tire iron. As you can see, it has a fairly sharper edge, and then the chisel portion, which is not covered with duct tape.
1M18.
This is a side view of the socket head of the tire wrench. Again, duct tape is covering the tire wrench almost all the way up to the socket head, and there's dried red residue on the socket head.
Final photograph 1M19.
This is an en-face or head-on view of the socket head. The one thing that I want to emphasize is the rounded edge of the socket head of the tire wrench. In addition, there's also a hexagonal pattern imprinted on the inner aspect of the socket head. When this photograph is subsequently compared to some of the injuries, the curvature of the socket head is consistent with some of the pattern abrasions caused on the body, and in addition, the edge of the hexagon is also indicated in some of the injuries as well.
So based on your view of Heesun Teague's body and also your view of this tire iron object we're looking at, you indicated you believe this tire iron is consistent with causing some of those injuries on her body.
That's correct. I believe that during the assault of Heesun Teague, the ligature that was indicated earlier was used, and this tire iron is consistent with having been used as well.
I'd like to go back to photo 1M12. And I'd like to see if we can zoom in, if we can zoom in any further. Can we do that? Okay. Dr. Tranchita, do you see the injury? It's on the right side of the photograph, the right side of Heesun Teague's kind of torso on her back. You can see the circle, is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you actually see on the right side of the circle that hexagon or more of a straight edge? Well, then I'll just ask Dr. Tranchita, you describe what you see in that injury.
As we talked about earlier, we are seeing a pattern injury present on the decedent's body. In other parts of the body, it's crescentic. In other words, only a portion of this rounded object has struck the decedent's body, so we're only seeing the crescent as opposed to the full moon or the full circle of the object. In this injury, we can see that, again, one side is hit, causing a crescentic impression, but then a portion of the other side is present, creating a more complete circle. On the inner aspect of the circle, there appears to be a portion of a hexagonal edge.
Okay. Finally, a couple final questions, Dr. Tranchita.
Of course.
Based on your autopsy, your observations, your training experience, do you have, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, an opinion as to the cause of death of Heesun Teague?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
I listed her cause of death as homicidal violence, including stab wounds of the torso, blunt force trauma of the head, torso, and extremities, and compression of the neck.
Do you have, again, an opinion? You kind of already indicated homicidal. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty to the manner of death of Heesun Teague based on everything that you placed on the record today?
I do.
What is that opinion?
I believe that the manner of death of Heesun Teague is homicide.
This time I'm going to offer exhibit number 11 into evidence, Your Honor. I believe that's the completed report of Dr. Tranchita for Heesun Teague's autopsy. Exhibit 12, which I believe are the 5 pages of diagrams that are a portion of the report, or exhibit number 11 as well.
I'll receive exhibits 11 and 12 into evidence.
No further questions for Dr. Tranchita.
Thank you. Cross-examination, Mr. Cotton?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tranchita. You may step down if you'd like to take your face shield off and put it in the box behind you marked used, and then replace it with your face mask. Thank you. Is he excused from his subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Are you ready to call your next witness?
I believe so, Your Honor. We're debating on which one to call, see if we can get somebody done still, because it's 4. So I think we're going to
And
select.
we can go a little longer today if need be.
The state would call Marion Bricker.
Okay.
All right. And can I ask Mr. Johnson if you can return Exhibit 9 to the clerk?
I have Exhibit 12.
I'm sorry, what's the witness's last name?
Bricker, B-R-I-C-K-E-R.
Thank you. Ms. Bricker, if you'd please come up to the witness stand. Just right up here. And if you'd stop right about there and raise your right hand to be placed under oath.
Do solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Thank you. You may be seated. And once you're seated, you can remove your mask and replace it with the face shield that's sitting on the counter there. The white part goes around the back of your head. That's okay. That black box is the microphone. There's a little button there that needs to be pushed because the red light needs to be on. And then if you would pull your chair up close to the table, we need to have your voice project out from the bottom of your mask toward the microphone. If you can pull the microphone closer. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Lassay.
Good afternoon, Ms. Bricker. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay. How old are you, Ms. Bricker?
I'm 26.
And do you live here in Green Bay or the Brown County area?
Yes.
Did you grow up here?
Yeah, I did.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up, well, it was a little bit in Ashwaubenon, but then since I was like 18, it's been in like Green Bay.
Did you graduate from high school here in Brown County?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Okay. Did you go to school here in Brown County?
Yeah, I went to West my senior year. Otherwise, I went to Ashwaubenon freshman and junior.
Are you familiar with a person by the name of Jacob Cayer?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Cayer?
I remember a little bit from school, but mostly a neighbor that when I lived in Green Bay, back in Western Ave.
And do you know about the time frame when you met Mr. Cayer?
Oh no, I want to say in 2013. I know it was like before I had my daughter. So, yeah, I want to say like 13.
you also know a person by the name of Sabrina Teague?
Yes.
How did you meet Sabrina?
A group of friends, like back when I was 18.
I'm going to draw your attention to the spring of 2016.
Okay.
In the spring of 2016, did there come a time when Mr. Cayer actually resided with you?
Yeah, he messaged me. He needed a place to stay, and I had a room.
And where was the residence where Mr. Cayer was staying with you?
It was on Western.
Did you have any sort of specific sort of dating type relationship with him, or was he just living with you?
No, just a friend staying with me. I'm helping out.
Ms. Bricker, I'm actually going to ask you if you're able to identify if Mr. Cayer is in the courtroom here today, but before you do so, I'm going to ask that the court ask all of the parties at council table and in the first row to do as we've done previously and remove our face masks.
Okay.
Ms. Bricker, do you see Mr. Cayer in court here today?
Yes.
Could you describe where he's seated and what he's wearing?
He's wearing blue.
Could you describe where he's seated relative to all of the other people in the room?
On the right side at the end, sitting by the guy wearing the gray suit.
I would ask the record to reflect that the witness has identified Mr. Cayer.
The record will so reflect, and it looks like everyone should putting your masks back on. Thank you.
During the time period when Mr. Cayer was residing with you, were you aware that Mr. Cayer had previously dated Sabrina Teague?
Yes.
Hold on one second, ma'am. Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Leading, yes.
I don't know. I guess I don't know if it's leading. Did you? I guess I could rephrase slightly. Did you know whether Mr. Cayer was acquainted with Sabrina Teague?
Yeah, she told me about it. Like, that they dated, like, years
Objection,
ago.
hearsay.
That's fine. I'll rephrase that question as well. Did Mr. Cayer ever specifically have any conversations with you about Sabrina Teague?
Yeah, there was one, I believe he was upset. I couldn't really tell you what it was about, because, I mean, it's so long ago. All I remember is that he was upset, and I just told him to let it go.
How could you tell that Mr. Cayer was upset?
By his actions, the tone in his voice. Yeah, I mean, that's all I could really describe.
And do you happen to know when that was that you had that conversation with Mr.
Yeah,
Cayer?
it was in my living room. He came in and was upset.
Do you know when that occurred?
I couldn't give you a date, but I know, like, it was, like, before, you know.
Are you aware that Sabrina Teague passed away?
Yes.
How close in time was your conversation with Mr. Cayer to Sabrina Teague's passing?
I want to say, like, 2 weeks. 2 weeks to a week.
So relatively close in time.
Yes.
No further questions for this witness.
Can I have a minute, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Ma'am, Mr. Cayer lived with you for approximately 3 months, is that what I understand?
Yes.
And it was during that springish time of 2016?
Yes.
And it was basically the two of you at the apartment except for when you would have your child, right?
Yes.
And there were no issues between you and Mr. Cayer, that'd be fair to say?
No.
He's a friendly guy towards you?
Yeah.
And the two of you would confide in each other?
Yeah, he came to me when he needed a friend.
Thank you, that's all.
Any redirect?
Clear, I don't know if I clarified this. The conversation that you had with Mr. Cayer about being upset with Sabrina, that occurred prior to her death, right?
I don't understand. I'm sorry.
That happened before she died, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, no further questions.
Any recross?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down. If you would take your face shield and place it in the basket behind you, marked used face shields, and then put your face mask back on. And she's excused from her subpoena.
Yes.
All right, and then you're free to go. Thank you. State's next witness.
There's some electronic discovery that, or some electronic exhibits that need to go on to the defense hard drive before the next one.
Okay.
I guess for our next witness, I'm going to try and get done with Sergeant Monica Janke, formerly the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. Sergeant Janke, if you could please come up to the witness stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Monica Bonnier Janke, BAUGNIET JANKE.
Sergeant Janke, at this point, if you would replace your face mask with the face shield that's on the counter in front of you. And then I've been doing my best to try to explain that it's difficult sometimes if we don't get your voice projecting from under the face shield into the microphone. So if you would just pull the microphone closer to you.
Sure. Let me readjust this.
Thank you.
Your Honor, could I approach the clerk for just a moment to look at a few exhibits I might want to use?
Yes.
Okay. Sergeant Janke, normally I ask what your current occupation is, but are you currently employed with the Brown County Sheriff's Department?
No, I'm retired.
Okay. And how long had you worked for the Brown County Sheriff's Department before you retired?
30 years.
Okay. And when did you retire?
January of 2018.
Okay. And when we talk about going back to June 7th and June 8th of 2016, at that time, what was your title at the Brown County Sheriff's Department?
I was a detective sergeant
And how long had you been a detective sergeant?
since about May of 2011.
Well, even though you're retired, I'm still going to call you Sergeant Janke, okay?
That's fine.
Now, you indicated your name, Monica Janke, but I know in some places I'll see Nikki listed. Can you tell the jury, is that still you, Nikki? Just have a different
It
name?
is. Nikki is like calling Robert Bob, so people call me Nikki. That's the name I go by.
Okay. So Sergeant Janke, I'm going to go back to June 7th, 2016. Probably the late night hours, sometime after 9 p.m. certainly. Did you get called to report to Aurora Bay Care as part of your duties with the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
And when you were actually called to go to Aurora Bay Care, were you told why you needed to report there?
Yes.
Can you just give us just a little summary of kind of what you were told, a brief summary?
I spoke with Lieutenant Valley. He indicated that there had been a homicide in Hobart, Lawrence, and that Hobart was requesting mutual aid from Brown County to assist with interviews.
Okay. And at that time, is that about all the information you had?
Yes.
All right. So when you arrive, you actually go then and arrive to Aurora Bay Care?
Eventually.
What time do you think you got to Aurora Bay Care, approximately?
About 11:15 p.m.
Okay. And was there anybody else that was going to work with you to attempt an interview that evening?
Yes, Detective Sergeant Zach Holschbach and I were working together.
And when you got to Aurora Bay Care, did you and Sergeant Holschbach get to go into a room and meet an individual?
Yes.
And did you later find out that person's name?
Yes.
What was his name?
Jacob Cayer.
Okay. And what kind of room was he in when you first met him at Aurora Bay Care?
He was in ER room 2.
Okay. And just to make sure, again, that we have the correct person, I'm going to ask the court's permission to have you identify, see if you can identify Jacob Cayer, if he's in the courtroom, the person you met at Aurora Bay Care. We're going to normally, should we remove our masks, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Okay.
He's
All right.
seated with his attorney at the table to my right.
Could you indicate what he's wearing today to make sure we have the correct person?
He's wearing a button-down blue shirt with a white T-shirt underneath.
To your right?
Yes.
Okay. I'd ask the record to reflect she's identified Mr. Cayer.
The record will so reflect, and it looks like everyone is putting their face masks back on. Thank you.
Now, were you present for almost the entire interview of Jacob Cayer that began again approximately, let's say, 11:30 p.m., all the way into June 8th, into Wednesday, till about 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 a.m.?
I was present from about the time we started collecting evidence from Mr. Cayer through the rest of the morning.
Okay. So you weren't present the entire time?
Not the entire time.
Okay. Now, when you did finally get there, when you were first present, was Sergeant Holschbach doing most of the talking with Mr. Cayer?
Yes.
And then at some point, especially when you started to assist in collecting evidence, did you begin to, towards the end of the interview, have more conversations with Mr. Cayer yourself?
Yes,
Do you think you built any type of rapport with him when you were talking to him?
I believe so.
Why would you say that?
At one point, he indicated that I reminded him of his mother, and he was talking freely to Detective Holschbach and I.
Okay. At some point during the interview process, were you aiding Nurse Dana Stieber in collecting evidence at St. Vincent Hospital when you had moved from Aurora to St. Vincent?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your role at St. Vincent Hospital as Dana Stieber was photographing and swabbing and obtaining evidence from Jacob Cayer's body? What was your role?
I took videos, and then Nurse Stieber was doing her photographs, and then she would take the swabs from different areas, collection points, and then I would receive the swabs and put them in the boxes appropriately and mark them for evidence.
Okay. And over your career, going back to 2016 in June and prior to that, had you received training on how to collect evidence and what to do with it once it's obtained by a forensic nurse, for example?
Yes.
That day, June 7th and June 8th more particularly, when you were assisting in collecting evidence from Jacob Cayer, did you follow your training experience?
Yes, I did.
And was it a team approach, kind of where Dana Stieber was doing part of it, you were, and then Sergeant Holschbach maybe was helping writing things down as well?
It was.
Okay. Can I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm going to show you what we marked earlier in this trial. Exhibit number 5. Have you seen exhibit number 5 before?
Yes, I have.
And again, just for court today, what is exhibit 5?
Exhibit 5 is a map that was drawn by Jacob Cayer at the hospital during the course of our interview. And the map shows 1386 Riverdale Drive.
1368 or 13?
I'm sorry, 1368?
Yep.
Okay.
And what I think I'm going to do, I'll make it brief. With the court's permission, Your Honor, can I put that up on the projector?
That's fine.
Go through fairly briefly some questions about the diagram. You see in the diagram there's a rectangle I'm going to do at the top middle of exhibit 5. Who actually drew that square, or the rectangle?
Mr. Cayer.
And then the various things on the diagram, for example, the driveway, the line of the fence, where it says garages, little squares, gigantic window. This whole layout, basically, who drew this diagram?
Mr. Cayer drew everything except the handwritten notations, which most of which I added.
And prior to when Mr. Cayer is drawing this, are you right there with Sergeant Holschbach watching?
Yes, I was.
And before this diagram is being drawn by Jacob Cayer, had you been out to this homicide scene at 1368 Riverdale?
No.
So you didn't know if this layout when Mr. Cayer was correct or not?
I had no idea.
And a couple things I want to ask. There's a place where it has the word knife written, the word, and then a line with an arrow pointing over to like the corner of that fence there. Did you see that?
Yes.
Why is the word knife written there with that arrow?
while we were talking, I asked Mr. Cayer where the knife was, and he indicated to me that he thought it was in that location. So he made a notation. He circled that area down kind of where the fences come together. And then, so that I could be sure we were clear, I asked him if that's what he meant, where the knife was, and he said yes. So I wrote in knife and then put an arrow to where he indicated we should look for the knife.
And then there also is written the words, where Sabrina fell. You see that?
I do.
And then from those words, there's a line going over kind of towards where the circle and the knife.
Yes.
Why does it have where Sabrina fell with that line over the side?
Again, Mr. Cayer indicated to me that there was foliage in that area and that Sabrina fell in that foliage. So he made that circle in that same area. And so I was trying to be clear to make sure that I understood exactly what he was talking about. And I wrote that in. Where Sabrina fell is my handwriting.
As you look at exhibit number 5 today in court, do you think it's an accurate depiction of the diagram that Mr. Cayer drew on
It is.
June 8, 2016?
Yes.
The evidence that was collected by Dana Stever, you indicated that you would take it from her and then you would do what with it? Put it in boxes or bags or different things?
Yes. If it fit into a box, I would put it into the box, and then I would detail on the box what was collected, and then place Mr. Cayer's name on it, his date of birth, my initials, and my badge number, along with what was going into the box, so that we were documenting at the time the samples were collected exactly what they were.
Can I continue to have the court's permission to approach the witness?
Yes, you have that permission.
Continue with exhibit number 13. The multi-page exhibit. I'd like to see if you could take a few minutes to look through exhibit 13. Okay. Sergeant Janke, did you get a chance to look at exhibit? Is it 13?
13.
Okay.
I
Did you get
did.
a chance to look at it?
Yes.
And it's a copy of one of your reports?
Yes.
And it sounds like you had indicated that you took on the role of I don't know what you want to call it, evidence custodian or helping to process evidence. Is that correct?
I did.
The first couple, I say the first 3 pages, list different items. It looks like they were confiscated from the hospital, bedding, blood samples of Mr. Cayer, blankets, things of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct.
The other pages of this report list swabs. I think they're items 1 through, looks like 40, which were swabs taken from Mr. Cayer. Is that correct?
42? Oh, no, the swabs would be 1 through 40.
Okay.
Correct.
And then 41 and 42 were a couple pieces of evidence, like a ring and a kind of must have been a chain around his wrist or something.
Yes.
So do you believe that Exhibit 13 accurately depicts certainly all the swabs that Dana Stever took from Jacob Cayer's body and then all the other items that you took control of that night of that early morning of June 8, 2016.
I do.
And as you went item by item to collect the swabs or whatever item it was you're taking, you followed your normal training and procedures and taking those items?
Yes, I did.
And then once you were completed with obtaining all the items from Mr. Cayer and you were done talking to Mr. Cayer, did you and Sergeant Holschbach take all those items and go back to the sheriff's office?
I collected the items and maintained them until we went back to the Brown County Sheriff's Office where they were secured, and then later Sergeant Holschbach and I worked together to place them into evidence.
And when they're placed into evidence, it's like a secure area, so they're locked in a secure
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Was that okay? Yes. Okay. No problem. I'd like to. What's that? But I'm not signing on. What I would like to do, Your Honor, is I wanted to play a couple videos. It's actually one video, but two segments, because the witness had indicated, Sergeant Janke, that there were videos taken during the sane exam of Mr. Cayer, and I'd like to play, again, two segments of a video. Now, we have it set up, and now we're worried if it's going to work or not, because this is the laptop we had problems with earlier today, but
Okay.
hopefully it'll work. All right. One thing I'd like to put on the record, Your Honor, at this time, as far as what we're playing, so it's clear for the record, I think in our exhibit it'll be L1K2, and it's video only. There's no audio to it. So, okay. And we're going to start this particular exhibit 1K2, I believe at 1 minute 28 seconds, and we're going to play it to 2 minutes 05 seconds. So the record could be clear on what we're playing. Is that okay with the court?
Yes. Any objection, Mr. Cotton?
No.
All right.
Okay. Sergeant Janke, we just played then that video-only clip, no audio, from 128 to 205. When you looked at it, did you get the chance to look at it in the courtroom?
Yes.
And can you describe what you were seeing in the video?
Jacob Cayer's left hand, and he had some cuts near his pinky finger and on his thumb area, and there was blood on his hand.
Okay. Do you think that the video we just watched in court is accurate in showing Jacob Cayer from the night or morning that you were with him on June 7th and June 8th of 2016?
Yes.
I'm going to show you one more video. It's going to be under, again, Exhibit 1K2. We're going to try to start the video at 3 minutes and 54 seconds, if we can get it exactly. There it is. And we're going to try and stop it at about 5 minutes and 46 seconds. Again, I believe it's video, no audio. The video now has been stopped. Did you get a chance to view it in the courtroom with us today?
Yes.
And what did you see in the video in the second segment we played today?
The video showed a tattoo on Mr. Cayer's back and then moved down his right side arm, showing his right hand and some cuts on his right hand, on the inside of his hand, his middle finger and his ring finger, and then blood all over his right hand.
Both videos appear to be blood on his hands.
Yes.
Do you think in watching that video, that second clip, from 3 minutes and 54 seconds to 5 minutes and 46 seconds, accurately displayed Jacob Cayer's hand again as you saw it on June 7th and June 8th, 2016?
Yes, it did.
Okay, no further questions for Sergeant Janke.
Mr. Cotton, cross-examination?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
You did prepare a few reports in this case, correct?
I did.
And because you did other things besides just be present in the hospital for Mr. Cayer's statements, right?
Yes, sir.
You interviewed witnesses, for example.
I did.
Two people in particular that you interviewed were Raymond Sunin, if I'm saying that correctly, Raymond Sunin? Sunin, and Kathleen Zeitler, fair to say?
Correct.
And going back to the night of this incident, you were, I think it's your testimony that you were dispatched first to the Brown County Sheriff's Department where you learned a little bit of information and then you went over to the hospital.
Yes, sir.
And the purpose of going to the hospital is because this, Mr. Cayer is a person of interest in this case, right?
That's correct.
Meaning that law enforcement wants to know what information they can learn.
Yes.
And so you were present with Detective Holschbach when some of the unusual statements were made by Mr. Cayer, were you not?
Yes, I was.
Statements like asking if he ran over people with a car, for example.
Yes.
And that just is one example of an unusual statement, right?
Yes.
Because nothing about the case involved a car running over people, right?
Not that we were aware of.
Was it part of your job to challenge Mr. Cayer on these thoughts, or was it just to gather what he wanted to say?
We were really there just to find out what he had to say at that point.
And of course, no sort of thorough investigation had been done at that point by law enforcement, right?
There were investigators and officers on the scene at that point, and then we had been dispatched to do the interviews.
Now, the interaction with Mr. Cayer in the hospital, I think we've established, occurred for many, many, many hours, 12 hours or so, that law enforcement was present with him, right?
I don't think it was quite 12 hours, but
Maybe 10 hours
yes.
or so. Yeah.
Yes.
Overnight into the next day. And you're present throughout the majority of that time, right?
Well, I was present with Zach Holschbach, but I wasn't in the room the entire time the interview was taking place. Or I should say during the entire conversation that Detective Holschbach had with Mr. Cayer.
Now, there were some blood draws that were done to Mr. Cayer, is that correct?
Yes.
And he consented to those blood draws, right?
He did.
And would you agree with me that there was no sign of him being under the influence of drugs or alcohol?
I would agree with that.
You've had experience seeing people who seem to be impaired by those things, right?
Yes, I have.
So was it your professional opinion that there was some intoxication that was happening here on his end, right?
I did not detect any odor of intoxicating beverage, and it didn't appear to me that he had any signs of having been drinking.
Now, you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the videos in this case is Mr. Cayer reenacting an event with you involved. Is that, do you remember that?
I do.
Where you're standing there and there's some demonstration of something, right?
Yes,
Now, and you've had a chance to watch that video, right?
I have.
And you were present for the discussion leading up to that, right?
Yes,
And you would agree with me that, in fact, what Mr. Cayer is doing is describing, he's demonstrating what somebody else did, not what he did. Would you agree with that?
no, I believe he was demonstrating how he had stabbed Sabrina.
Well, you were there to hear the various things that were said over those many hours, right?
Yes,
And would you agree that Mr. Cayer was describing an event at that house that he witnessed, but not an event that he was responsible for?
that's not how I understood it.
You interpreted it differently.
I think we had asked him specifically, and it was my understanding by the conversation that I had with Mr. Cayer and the conversation that was taking place with in front of Detective Holschbach that he was showing me how and where he was stabbing Sabrina, or how and where he had stabbed her.
Okay. Now, you were a sergeant detective with the sheriff's department, right?
Yes,
And what types of investigations were you specializing in your career?
well, I had done many investigations, death investigations, property investigations, violent crimes, sexual assaults.
Okay, so it sort of spans the spectrum of cases that you've investigated.
Yes,
And you would agree with me that part of your job as a detective is when you apprehend a suspect or a person of interest, many times you will read Miranda rights and ask them questions, right?
yes,
And Miranda rights are sort of the precursor, the first step before you ask questions, right?
correct.
And many times individuals are brought into the sheriff's department where they're questioned in an interrogation room. Is that not true?
If the situation dictates, yes.
Where the person is in a room and it's a special room that's designed for interrogations, fair to say?
Yes,
Now, this wasn't that case. Mr. Cayer was never taken to an interrogation room to be questioned, right?
no,
And similarly, in terms of you've certainly had situations in your career, I assume, where individuals have confessed to crimes, right?
yes,
Where you sit down with an individual and you write out a statement and they sign it. You've had those experiences?
I have,
And you would agree with me that that did not occur in this case, right?
yes,
What occurred was this wide-ranging discussion that happened over the course of many hours at two different hospitals, right?
that's correct.
With nurses around and medical professionals and things like that, right?
Yes.
At various times.
At various times.
Including an individual, Mr. Cayer, who had been bitten by a police dog. You knew that, right?
I'm sorry, what's that?
In that you knew prior to Mr. Cayer coming to the hospital, he had been bitten by a police dog, right?
I don't know if we knew that prior. I would presume that we did,
Okay.
but at some point we became aware of that, and certainly when we arrived at Aurora Baycare, he had injuries.
And that,
I think we did know that. As a matter of fact, that's why he had been taken to Aurora Baycare.
exactly, because of
Yeah.
that injury
Yeah.
specifically, right?
Yes,
And when a person is apprehended by law enforcement, if they don't have injuries, they either get booked into the jail or they get taken to the police department, fair to say?
it just depends on the situation. In this case, there would have been a lot of evidence that we would have been collecting from Mr. Cayer. So in a case like this, it would have been appropriate to transport him to the hospital to have that done.
Right, because apart from the injuries, which was sort of the first purpose, then they had to do the swabs and things like that, right?
Yes,
But you would agree that once he was medically cleared from the hospital, there was no further interrogation of Mr. Cayer at the police department?
there was no interview or interrogation at a police department.
And certainly no signed confession. You would agree with that, right?
I'm sorry, sir?
And certainly no signed confession. You would agree with that?
No signed confession, correct.
You did, if I could just ask your question about this Miss Zeitler individual, was that the woman who last saw Sonny before she was killed?
Yes.
So she was important to interview because you want to know who she saw last and what information that person can provide.
We were trying to identify a timeline, correct.
And you did identify a timeline, at least you believe you did, right?
We believed we did.
That she was with Miss Zeitler at a comedy show and then she went home, right?
That's what Ms. Zeitler indicated, yes.
And there were other questions asked of Ms. Zeitler about whether there were other people that Ms. Teague might be concerned about. Is that true?
I'm going to object on relevancy of these questions. It's hearsay unless it's something that's inconsistent with some other witness saying. So I don't know, it doesn't fit on relevancy anymore, and I don't know that it's inconsistent. He's just going over it again, what Ms. Zeitler said.
Mr. Cotton?
I don't have anything to add to ask the court to make a ruling.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Did you have any follow-up, you yourself, ma'am, did you have any follow-up interviews with Mr. Cayer after he was discharged from the hospital?
No, I did not.
That's all. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the parties to approach. Any additional questions, Mr. Cotton? Redirect?
Just one question as follow-up. I know Mr. Cotton was asking you some questions about, was Mr. Cayer describing somebody else stabbing or doing things at the house? Do you recall those questions?
I recall the question.
When you think back to watching the video of Mr. Cayer demonstrating with a pen, you recall that in the video, right?
I do.
And do you recall it in your own mind as well?
Mr. Cayer was showing me that how he was stabbing Sabrina, how he had stabbed her, in what area of the body he had stabbed her.
No confusion on that?
No confusion whatsoever.
Okay. That's all we have.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton, any additional questions for this witness? Thank you. You may step down if you would just put your face shield in the box behind you marked use face shields and then
Thank you.
wear your face mask out. Thank you. Any additional witnesses, or are we going to conclude for the day?
I know it's late in the day. I would like to get through one more witness. I do have Katie Hoffmeyer here from the Crime Lab. She drove here from Wausau.
Okay.
I'd like to complete it today.
And do you anticipate this being a lengthy witness?
Medium length, depending on the cross-examination, though, I will presume we could be done by 5:30.
Is that okay with everybody on the jury panel? Looks like we're seeing nodding. All right, would you call your next witness then?
This day we'll call Katie Hoffmeyer.
If you could just give us one moment, ma'am. All right, if you'd please come up to the witness stand then.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now before the court, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Katie Hoffmeyer, spelled Hoffmeyer.
Thank you. You may be seated at the witness stand. And then once seated, if you would replace your mask with the face shield that's on the counter.
Can you describe for the record how you are employed?
I work at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Wausau.
What is your position there?
I'm a crime scene response team leader as well as a forensic scientist supervisor.
What does a forensic scientist supervisor do?
A forensic scientist supervisor at the Wausau Crime Laboratory oversees the technical units at the laboratory, which consists of the controlled substances unit, latent print and footwear unit, crime scene response team, as well as forensic imaging.
And what does a crime scene response team leader do?
A crime scene response team leader is responsible for assisting law enforcement agencies to respond to crime scenes and process scenes. They will come in and assess a scene, locate items of evidence, document the scene in its entirety through note-taking, sketches, photography, and video, and then collecting items of evidence. The team leader works hand-in-hand with other members of the team, crime scene response team as well, such as photographers or personnel who do video.
And Ms. Hoffmeyer, how long have you been with the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory?
Since September of 2011.
And can you discuss your training and education that is related to that position?
I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in Biomedical Sciences with a minor in Chemistry from Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. I also have a Master's of Science degree in Forensic Sciences from Boston University.
Ms. Hoffmeyer, as part of your employment with the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, were you dispatched to a scene in the village of Hobart around June 8th of 2016?
Yes, I was.
What was your role in responding to that scene?
I responded to the scene as a crime scene response team leader.
And were other members of your laboratory with you?
Yes.
Who usually is part of that team?
There was 2 other members that came to the scene from the Wausau Laboratory, Zi Zhang and Michelle Beckhelm, or was previously Freund.
And again, what was your role then in that response?
Our role was to assist the law enforcement agency to process the crime scene.
What did you do upon arrival?
Upon arrival, we waited for a search warrant, and then we entered the scene with representatives from the Hobart Lawrence Police Department, as well as the Division of Criminal Investigations.
And once law enforcement arrived and you had the search warrant, did you in fact enter the scene?
Yes.
what did you do upon entry?
We walked through a property adjacent to the residence located at 3168 Riverdale Drive, which was the property that a female victim was located at. We then did a walkthrough of the residence located at 3168 Riverdale Drive, did a walkthrough of the entire residence, as well as a walkthrough of an adjacent property.
You said 3168. If you reviewed your report, would that refresh your recollection as to the exact address?
Yes, it would.
As part of your work on this particular case, did you prepare a report?
Yes, I did.
Ms. Hoffmeyer, I'm going to ask if you can pull the microphone a little bit closer to you. It's the black box at the light. Thank you.
So I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 14. Can you identify that document? Take one just to look through.
State Exhibit number 14 is the laboratory report that I generated for this case.
And does it have the correct address on there?
Yes, I apologize. The scene was addressed, or the scene address was 1368 Riverdale Drive.
As opposed to 3 and the 1, that's all. Once you had the opportunity to sort of take in that crime scene and sort of all aspects of it, what was your determination as to the amount of manpower that be needed?
After conducting the walkthrough, I called in 2 additional teams to help with scene processing. We had representatives come from the Madison Crime Laboratory as well as the Milwaukee Crime Laboratory.
Even after those folks arrived, did you remain sort of the lead coordinator or team leader?
Yes, I did.
And were you the one who was ultimately responsible for putting together the report for this incident?
Yes.
What goes into that?
To generate the report for this scene, I took all of the notes from that I had taken as well as the notes taken from other team leaders that were on scene, as well as reviewing all of the photos that were captured from the scene.
Do you recall a rough estimate of how many photos were taken at this scene?
Over 1,700 photos.
And you had an opportunity as part of preparing your report to review all of those photographs, is that fair?
Yes, I have.
And again, you feel comfortable that you saw all aspects of this scene as both on your initial walkthrough and then through your work on this scene?
Yes.
Hoffmeyer, I'm going to show you a series of photographs from this scene and sort of ask you to describe what those photographs depict. If I could have use of the screen. Not again. Happen again. I apologize, this feature keeps breaking the system. Just try that in mine. The PGA. And I'll just work with the thing that I'm on. Would you do that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right. Ms. Hoffmeyer, I'm going to show you what's been identified as Exhibit 101. Can you indicate what's depicted in that photograph?
State Exhibit 101 is a photograph of the property adjacent to the residence with where the female victim was located outside with a white sheet over top of the body.
And did you have a particular portion of the scene that you yourself were primarily responsible for once all the other team members were on scene?
I was primarily responsible for processing all of the outdoor or exterior areas of the scene, as well as the basement of the residence.
And other members of the team were responsible for different sections of the scene?
Yes.
Do you know specifically which members were responsible for which sections of the scene?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jury?
The Madison team who responded, which consisted of Nick Stulke and Sarah Zastro-Arkins, were responsible for processing of the main floor of the residence, as well as recovery of the female victim located in the bathtub. And then the Milwaukee team, who consisted of Julie Avila and Troy Chadwick, were responsible for processing of the garage attached to the residence and the vehicle that was parked in front of the garage.
Sophomore, I'm going to show you what's been marked as 102. Can you describe what's depicted in that image?
State Exhibit 102 is a photograph of a fence line or a line of trees or bushes between the two properties.
Actually, what I'm going to do, I didn't give you the opportunity to view an overview shot. I'm going to show you what's been marked previously as Exhibit 1C1. Is there a laser pointer up there? I'm going to ask you on this overhead photo 1C1 if you could use a laser pointer to demonstrate generally the area where that fence line is located that we just saw in the previous photograph.
Okay. The fence line is located along these trees here between the residence at 1368 Riverdale Drive and then the neighboring property.
The 103, what is depicted in that photograph?
State Exhibit 103 is a photograph of that same tree line, and there was apparent blood located on the trees between.
And 104?
State Exhibit 104 is a photograph of two items of evidence that were located in that tree line, which was a cordless phone as well as a knife at markers 12 and 13.
And 105, what is depicted in that photograph?
State Exhibit 105 is a photograph of the cordless phone at marker 12.
Did you make any observations as to the back of that phone?
The cordless phone had a battery missing out of it, as well as it was covered in apparent blood.
And 106?
State Exhibit 106 is a photograph of a knife that was located in the tree line at marker 13, which was also covered with apparent blood.
Is that same tree line that is in between 1368 and 1378, the neighboring residence?
Yes.
And what's depicted in 107?
State Exhibit 107 is a photograph of the tree line with apparent blood visible on the tree branches.
108?
State Exhibit 108 is a photograph of the female victim located outside, who was later identified as Sabrina, in the backyard of the adjacent residence.
And what else is depicted in that photograph from an evidentiary standpoint?
In the photograph, you can also see kind of a trail of apparent blood that led from the tree line to where her body was located.
What is depicted in photograph 109?
State Exhibit 109 is a photograph of some apparent foot impressions in blood that were traveling towards the tree line. It's at in this area here.
And you said they're traveling toward the tree line. Where does that trail begin in this photograph?
The trail was observed exiting the attached garage of the residence to the tree line.
And what is depicted in 1010?
State Exhibit 1, excuse me, what is the exhibit again?
10, the letter O, and then 10.
So State Exhibit 1010 is a photograph of apparent blood that was visible on the driver's side of a vehicle that was parked in the driveway.
And what is depicted in 1011?
State Exhibit 1011 is a photograph of apparent blood on the door handle of the same vehicle that was pictured before.
What is depicted in 1012?
State Exhibit 1012 is a photograph of the attached garage with bloodstains present on the floor.
And what's depicted in 1013?
State Exhibit 1013 is a photograph of the attached garage with the stairway leading into the house with apparent blood on the door, the wall, the stairs, and the floor.
Sophomore, does there appear to be a large number of shoes indicated in this photograph?
There are quite a few pairs of shoes up on the landing there.
What's depicted in 1014?
State Exhibit 1014 is a photograph of the first stall of the garage, which is closest to the house, showing bloodstains, apparent bloodstains on the garage floor, as well as a shovel, and more bloodstains traveling on this side of the lawnmower as well.
And 1015?
State Exhibit 1015 shows the first stall of the garage with apparent bloodstains on the floor by the lawnmower.
1016?
State Exhibit 1016 is a photograph of the center stall of the garage with apparent blood on the floor.
1017?
State Exhibit 1017 is a photograph of the third stall of the garage with apparent blood on the floor.
No, in both of the last two photographs, 16 and 17, the garage doors are open. Do you recall which, if any, of the garage doors were open upon your arrival at the residence that night?
Upon our arrival, only one of the garage doors was open, and that was the garage door closest to the house, the first stall.
So these other doors, they would have been opened by crime lab or law enforcement in order to assist in documenting the scene?
Yes.
What's depicted in 1018?
State Exhibit 1018 is a photograph of area near the third stall of the garage with apparent bloodstains on the floor, as well as a service door that was on the far side of the garage with more apparent bloodstains near the door and on the door.
And what's depicted in 1019?
State Exhibit 1019 shows the service door with apparent bloodstains on the wall as well as on the door.
And what's depicted in 1020?
State Exhibit 1020 is a photograph of the stairway going into the house with apparent bloodstains on the floor, the stairs, the wall, and near the garage door buttons.
1021.
State Exhibit 1021 is a photograph of the garage door opener with apparent blood stains in this area at marker 10.
It's depicted in 1022.
State Exhibit 1022 shows the garage door located in the first stall in the open position, and there are apparent blood stains on the door.
1023.
State Exhibit 1023 shows the stained garage door of the first stall with apparent blood stains on the door.
And had that door been closed, so if the door was in the closed position, approximately where, height-wise, are those blood stains?
If the door had been in the closed position, it would have most likely been, around your knees if it had been closed.
At any other points in the garage, did you note blood at that height? Meaning like the height, ceiling height? Were there blood staining in the garage at ceiling height in any other places in the garage?
No, there was not.
Or at any other of the garage doors, was there blood at that at ceiling level?
No, there was not.
Could you identify what's indicated in photograph 1024?
State Exhibit 1024 is a photograph taken from the kitchen of the residence. The service door leading to the garage is on the right, and there's a laundry room in the center of the photograph. There's apparent blood stains on the floor, as well as on the wall and on the refrigerator.
What is depicted in photograph 1025?
State Exhibit 1025 is a photograph of a cell phone that was located on the floor near the laundry room with a red blanket.
You know if that phone also had its battery removed?
Does not appear to have a battery.
Picture 1026. What is depicted there?
Photograph 1026 is a photograph of the laundry room floor with reddish stains or apparent blood stains with the cell phone as well as a red blanket.
And what is depicted in 1027?
Can you repeat the number again?
1027.
Photograph 1027 is the kitchen and dining room area of the residence with apparent blood stains on the floor as well as on the countertops.
And 1028?
State Exhibit 1028 is another photograph of the kitchen with blood stains on the floor as well as some items that were tipped over, such as the chair and this item here.
And 1029?
State Exhibit 1029 is also a photograph of the kitchen.
Was that taken on the same day or a different day than the previous photograph?
This was taken on the following day, June 9th of 2016.
And 1030? What is depicted there?
State Exhibit 1030 is a photograph of the kitchen with apparent blood stains on the floor, as well as a phone jack that had apparent blood stains, and the phone was missing from the kitchen.
What's depicted in 1031? Is that a close-up of the same area?
Yes, it is.
And 1032?
State Exhibit 1032 is a close-up image of the phone jack with apparent blood stains.
1033?
State Exhibit 1033 is a photograph leading to the basement of the residence. On the floor at the bottom of the stairs was a phone present. There was also apparent blood stains on the jack of the cord.
1034, what's depicted in that photograph?
State Exhibit 1034 is a photograph of the phone on the basement floor at marker 2.
1035.
1035 is a photograph of the phone at marker 2.
Same phone, just close-up photograph, is that fair?
Yes.
And 1036, what does this depict?
1036 is a photograph taken from the dining room of the residence with the stairs to the left, the hallway leading to a bathroom as well as the master bedroom at the end of the hallway.
1037, what is depicted in that photograph?
State Exhibit 1037 is a photograph of the hallway with apparent blood stains present on the wall, and then the bathroom is to the right.
And what's depicted in 1038?
State Exhibit 1038 is the door jamb on the door leading into the master bedroom that appears to be broken, as well as having reddish-brown stains present.
And what's depicted in 1039?
State Exhibit 1039 is a photograph taken from the master bedroom faced into the master bathroom with apparent blood on the floor.
And what's depicted in 1040?
State Exhibit 1040 is a photograph of the master bathroom with apparent blood on the floor.
And what is depicted in 1041?
State Exhibit 1041 is a photograph of the main bathroom of the residence with apparent blood stains on the floor, cabinets, countertops, toilet, and walls.
And is this the bathroom that's located off the hallway that we observed previously?
Yes, it is.
Exhibit 1042, what is depicted there?
State Exhibit 1042 is another overall photograph of the main floor bathroom with reddish or apparent blood stains on the countertop, sink, the floor. The toilet was broken. There's zip ties present on the floor as well.
What is depicted in 1043?
State Exhibit 1043 is a photograph of apparent blood present on the front of the bathroom cabinet.
What is depicted in 1044?
State Exhibit 1044 is a photograph of the victim, who was later identified as Heesun, in the bathroom tub.
What is depicted in 1045?
State Exhibit 1045 is a photograph of the zip ties located on the bathroom floor at marker 28.
What is depicted in photograph 1046?
State Exhibit 1046 is a photograph of a pair of socks located in the bathroom sink at marker 31.
Do you know if those socks were ultimately collected?
Yes, they were.
Do you know who was responsible for collecting those socks?
The crime scene response team collected many items as well as the Division of Criminal Investigation. For marker 31, a representative from the Division of Criminal Investigations collected that item.
What is depicted in photo 1047?
State Exhibit 1047 is the hand of the female victim located in the bathtub.
1048?
And State Exhibit 1048 is a photograph of the right hand of the victim found in the bathtub.
And what is depicted in 1049?
State Exhibit 1049 is an overall photograph of the living room of the residence.
It's depicted in 1050.
1050 is a photograph of the living room with the kitchen in the background and a tire iron present on the floor.
1051, what is depicted in that photograph?
1051 is a photograph of the living room with the tire iron on the floor.
And what is depicted in 1052?
1052 is a photograph of the tire iron at marker 1.
And 53?
Is a closer, 1053 is a closer image of the tire iron at marker 1.
What is depicted in 1054?
1054 is a photograph taken from the entryway of the residence facing the living room with apparent blood stains and a foot trail on the floor.
And 1055?
1055 is a photograph of the floor in the entryway and kitchen area with apparent footprints in blood.
What is depicted in 1056?
1056 is a photograph of a bedroom that was located in the basement of the residence.
1057, what is depicted there?
1057 is a photograph of a window within that bedroom that had appeared to be open with a broken window jamb, as well as grass poking in through the window.
1058?
1058 is another photograph of the window in the basement bedroom.
What is depicted in 1059?
1059 is a photograph of the basement bedroom floor with a shoe, a DC shoe on the floor.
What is depicted in 1060?
1060 is a photograph of the basement bedroom with the shoe at marker 12, as well as another shoe that was between the bed and the couch at marker 13.
What is depicted at 1061?
1061 is a photograph of the other shoe at marker 13.
Also the DC brand?
Yes.
Ms. Hoffmeyer, you testified earlier that the crime laboratory, in addition to documenting the scene, obviously had a role in collecting evidence at a scene. Is that right?
Could you repeat the question?
In addition to documenting the scene, the crime lab obviously had a role in assisting to collect evidence from that scene. Is that fair?
Yes.
You indicated you brought 3 teams to this scene.
Yes.
Is that typical?
It doesn't happen very often.
In fact, was this one of the more expansive crime scenes you've worked with in your career?
Yes, it was.
A number of items of evidence were collected. Is that right?
Yes.
You, as the crime scene response team, what is your role in terms of collecting or documenting that evidence, or what is your goal, of doing that?
The goal of the team is to document and collect evidence that are located within the scene, no matter the number that is present, to collect them, preserve them, and possibly have them analyzed in the future.
Is it your role to make the decisions or judgments about what things on scene are going to be analyzed or going to be relevant as the case develops?
No, it is not.
I think when we were having a conversation preparing for this case, you mentioned something about you only get one chance to get out and document the scene. Is that a fair statement, that the reason why you collect everything is that this is your chance to get out there and document everything?
Yes, we have one opportunity to process the entire scene, and we put many hours into doing that until it's completed.
How long were you and your team on that scene here in Hobart?
Our teams were present on scene for 2 days.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Attorney Cobb, any cross-examination?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, you identified, I think, 61 photos that you just went through with this date, correct?
I don't know the number, but yes, a lot of photos.
And those are photos you're familiar with because you've seen them before today, right?
Yes.
And you were present at that scene and involved in the photographing process, right?
Yes, I was present, and my team of photographers photographed and captured those images.
And as you said, the goal is to document and collect evidence, right?
Yes.
To then analyze it in the future, right?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Cayer is accused of committing this crime. You know that, right?
Yes.
These photos are taken after everything has happened, right? No suspects are present or persons of interest at that stage, right?
That is correct.
And so the photos themselves don't tell us what, if anything, Mr. Cayer did, do they?
Could you repeat the question?
The photos themselves don't show what, if anything, Mr. Cayer did, correct?
They are not live images of what actions may have occurred before our arrival.
So it's up to other people to try to piece together the best they can what may or may not have happened, fair to say?
Correct.
Okay, that's all.
Any redirect?
No.
All right. Thank you. You may step down. If you would place your face shield in the box behind you marked used face shield, and then replace your face shield then with your mask. You're free to go. Is she released from her subpoena?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffmeyer. All right. Very good. So we, I think, made good progress today, ladies and gentlemen. From what I've heard from the parties is they are at least on or ahead of schedule for how they thought things would go. So that's a good thing for us, so that we should be able to complete things timely. We will continue to work hard, though, and take reasonable breaks and maybe stay a little bit later tomorrow if necessary. So if you would arrive back again tomorrow so that we can begin at 8:30. I don't think there's a need to call the jury line, because I'm telling you that we're going to start again tomorrow at 8:30. If something unforeseen would happen, we will call you. But otherwise, if you could just make sure that you're here and through the screening process, and so we can start at 8:30. You're reminded not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else or do any research on your own. Please rise for the jury. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. If you would just leave your notepads on your chair. Please be seated. I just wanted to make a quick record about a sidebar. When Ms. Janke was on the stand, she was asked a question about her interview of Ms. Zeitler by Mr. Cotton. And the question was about other people that Ms. Teague might be concerned about. There was an objection as to relevancy. There was no argument from Mr. Cotton, and I ruled that I would sustain the objection. Mr. Cotton asked, I think, one more question, and then I asked the parties to approach because the more I thought about it, I wasn't certain what his question was actually asking. And so I asked him about that. We discussed whether he wanted the question answered and if he wanted to pursue that any further, and I believe the answer was no, you were fine with where we were. Okay. Anything else you want to make with respect to a record on that issue from the state's perspective?
Not from the state, Your Honor, no.
From the defense? Okay. Anything else we need to address today?
No, Your Honor.
All right. We'll see you back tomorrow morning. If you could be here a little before 8:30 so that if there's anything we have to address, we have time to address it. Thank you. Have a good evening.